If you want to learn how to build a responsive sidebar in HTML, CSS and JavaScript, then this video is for you. In this video, we are going to be building a fully responsive sidebar, and this can be used for dashboards, can be used also for admin sections and other sections that looks like the dashboard in whatever application you want to build. So we are going to be building this from scratch in HTML, CSS and vanilla JavaScript, and I'll be doing my best to explain everything as we go through the tutorial. So even if you're a beginner or you just want to learn how to build a responsive sidebar, this tutorial is for you. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. So this is basically what we're going to be building in this lesson. We see that the sidebar is fully responsive. When we click on this button here, we see that it closes the sidebar, and when we click on this button right here, it will open the sidebar. And if we remark, this button right here has a pulsing effect so that it can show the user that this is a button that they should click on. So we've made it subtle so it shouldn't get in the way of whatever is in your dashboard or your admin section, and it pulsates in a way that the user can actually know that this is the button they have to click on. And it's fully responsive, so once we go to the mobile view, once we minimize it and go to the mobile view, it actually responds and closes the sidebar automatically, and once we open it, it opens it automatically. So without further ado, let's get straight into the tutorial. So let's get started. So I've already created my folder, so I'm just going to import it. I'll just go ahead and drag it directly from the desktop and paste here. So as I earlier said, this tutorial is for absolute beginners. So even if you have no experience in coding with HTML, CSS and JavaScript, you can still learn a lot from this. So the first thing we are going to do is we are going to create our files. We'll start with creating our HTML file. Then we are going to create our CSS file. We'll call it style.css. And finally, we'll create our JavaScript file and give it the name of script.js. The first thing we are going to do now here is that we are going to add our boilerplate code. In VS Code, to do this, you type the exclamation mark and click enter. Then we just come and add in a title here of responsive sidebar. Then next we are going to open this with live server. So we right click and click on open with live server. If you don't have the live server extension installed, what you have to do is you have to come to these extensions here and click on live server, and then just come and install it right here. If you don't have it installed, please do this as it's going to make development easier. Now what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to minimize my code editor and then put my browser just right beside it, like this, so that we can see what we are doing as soon as we type in the code. So first things first, we're going to add in a div, and then we'll give it an ID of sidebar. We'll give it a class name of sidebar too. Then inside this div, this is where our sidebar elements are going to be. So first things, we are going to do another div. We'll give it a class of sidebar header. This is basically going to have our logo. And then inside this sidebar header now, we are going to say, we're going to add an h3. If you have an actual logo, you can replace this h3 with an image and then put it as your logo. Then here we're going to have a button, which is going to be our bar, which is going to help us to close the sidebar. Because remember, the sidebar is responsive, so you can actually open and close it. So we'll give it a class name here of button. In order to add a cross logo here, we are going to use a character entity in HTML. And we'll add the and sign and then use times and then close it this way. This is how you add character entities. You see that as we added and, VS Code basically showed us a lot of suggestions. So below this, we can now add our unordered list, because the unordered list is basically going to be our sidebar items. So here we're going to have unordered list. Here we'll have li here for the list items. Inside this list items here, we're going to have the anchor tag. And this first anchor tag here is going to be the dashboard. Here we can give it a class, and we give it a class name of active. This class name active is basically just to show that this is the active page, because when the page is active, it is highlighted. So we want to explicitly define that in our CSS. So next, inside this, we are going to add a logo. So we're going to add the I tag, and then we'll give it a class of FA, then tachometer. because this is basically from Material UI. So the next thing we need to do here is we need to add our Material UI library. So I'm just going to copy it here and paste. You can get this from the link in the description. So you come and copy the link here. This is basically just from Style Reference, which is going to have our logo. As you can see, our logo appears here. The next thing we're going to link here, let us link, let's link our, the next thing we're going to link here is our CSS style. So we're going to have rel equals to style shape, and then href equals to style.css. So there's a really cool font I like using for my dashboard. So we are going to go to Google Fonts. Let's go to Google Fonts and we download a new font. So we can browse fonts. I'm going to search for Inter. A lot of SaaS applications use this font. That is why I use this font. So let me come to remove family and then get fonts. And then we click on get embed code. Then we come to the web right here, we copy code, and we just come and add our font right here. So before we move forward, let's go ahead and add our fonts throughout our code. So we go to the CSS file, we click on body. Then after clicking on body, we come right here, and then we copy this right here. So we add the font family. Let's add the font family, we add the default font. And we see that our font has already changed. So if we cancel it here, we see that we actually add the Intel font and it looks way better. So now let's also add a margin of 0 and then a padding of 0. Because by default, there is some baseline CSS in every basic HTML page. So adding margin 0 and padding 0 basically sets everything to null. So you can start with a clean canvas and style everything normally. So I'll go ahead and close this Google Fonts here. And then I've just pressed Ctrl S to format my code with Prettier. So if you don't have Prettier, you come here and you can install Prettier. So Prettier basically helps you format your code automatically without needing to do it by yourself. So pressing Ctrl S helps you format your code automatically. That's why it looks better this way. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to copy this and paste a couple of times so we can have our other menu items. So here we're going to paste it once, let's paste it another time, and let's paste it the last time. So here we're just going to come and modify the individual elements. So remove the class active from the other parts because we only want the dashboard to be active. Then here we're going to have users. Here we're going to have projects. Here we're going to have documents. And finally here we're going to have settings. For the icons here, we're going to change the icons. So here is going to be FA users. Here we are going to add FA phone. You can add whatever icon you want. I just added this one just so that it can be as close to the names as possible. Here is going to be FA file. And lastly, we are going to have FA cog for settings. Now the next thing we are going to do now is we are going to add our content because the sidebar is basically in the side and then the main element or the main content is to the right, so just beside the sidebar. So next what we're going to do is that after this first div that we created here, this sidebar div, just below this sidebar div, we are going to have our content. So here is going to be div and then the class name content. So what I like doing is that I like naming my sections in HTML so it can be easier to read. So I'm just going to name this here sidebar, and then I'm going to come and name this here content. So here is going to be main content. So just inside this, we're going to have a div. We're going to give it a class of open button, because this button is going to be used to open our sidebar. So here we're going to give it an ID of open button. Then inside this div now we are going to give it an icon. We'll say chevron open. So here we're going to say chevron right. This is going to basically help us to open our sidebar when our sidebar is closed. Now just below this we are going to add our content, and it's going to be very simple content, which is going to say welcome to the dashboard. So here we're going to have h1, welcome to your dashboard. Now this is basically it. So this is all about our HTML, and now we can head over to our CSS. So before we head over to our CSS, let us add our or link our JavaScript file right below our page. So here we're going to have script src script.js, and then here we're going to have script. So this is all about our HTML. Now we can head over to our CSS or our style. Now the first thing we're going to do here is we are going to give it a background color here. Let's give it a background color. It's going to be something like a little bit pinkish. So it's very subtle, so it's not very easy to see, but I think you can remark the change. Then we're going to target the sidebar, and the sidebar is what we have right here. So the sidebar, let's have the sidebar here. We're going to give it a height of 100 view h, so you can basically take the full length of our screen. Then we're going to give it a width of 250 pixels, and then we'll give it a position of fixed. So basically when you give it a position of fixed, it basically ignores, and the sidebar is basically what we have right here. So here is the sidebar. This is what we are targeting. So inside this sidebar, we're going to give it a height of 100 view h. So you should basically take the entirety of our screen, that is from top to bottom. That is why you see that it has basically pushed this to very down here. But in order to make, that is why you see that he has basically pushed these two items right down here, because this sidebar is taking the entirety of the screen. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to give it a width of 250 pixels. Now next, what really makes a sidebar is this next property, which is the position. We'll give it a position of fixed. The position of fixed basically ignores all other items on the screen and basically stands on the fixed position on the screen. So in our case here, it's going to stand only to the left here. So giving a position of fixed, we'll give it now a background color. This will help you really visualize what is going on here. So the background color here is going to be a color of something like purple. So it's going to be F4, 6E5. So now we see that this welcome to our dashboard is now covered on the sidebar, but you're going to see what we are going to do in the next few minutes so that we can always have this content to the right of our screen. So let's keep styling this. So we're going to give the color of our element white, and then we're going to give it a transition of transform to, we're going to give it a transition and target the transform property to 0.3 seconds ease in out. This is basically the syntax of the transition property. You have the property you're trying to target, the delay, and then the timing function. So we're going to have a transform function here, which is going to help us have a cool transition once we close the sidebar. So we're going to give it a transform here. Translate x is going to be 0. And then we're going to give it a box shadow. Give it a box shadow of 2 pixels. 0, 12 pixels. And then RGBA 0, 0, 0. And then with an opacity of 0.1, which is just going to give it a very subtle box shadow. Next, we're going to have the side header. We're going to have a side header here. We give it a display of flex, which is going to put these two right beside each other, as you can see here. We give it a justify content of space between. Then we align the items to the center. Then we give it a padding of 10 pixels to the top and 20 pixels horizontally. And 20 pixels horizontally. Then we're going to give it, we don't need to give it a background color. We're going to give it a color of white. So next we're going to have the nav links. So let's see where the nav links comes into play. So we need to add a class here of nav links. We are going to target the nav links now. So we're going to say dot nav links. You know what? Let's add a dash here because it's easier to read this way. So we're going to give it a dash. And then for the nav links now, we're going to have list style type known. So we can remove all of these dots here. And then we give it a padding of 20 pixels. Then the next thing we're going to do is we are going to target the nav links element. So we're going to say nav links dot li dot a or nav links space li space a. Then we're going to give it a text decoration of known, so we can remove all the underlines. Then we have color white, and then we can have a display of flex. Then align items center. Then we give it a padding of 10 pixels. Then we give it a border radius of 5 pixels. Then we give it a transition. We give the property is going to be background here, and then 0.3 seconds, and then we give it another transition here, which is going to basically target the border radius, and a delay of 0.1 seconds. So we can save this, and then just below this we are going to add a hover effect. So here we're going to say dot nav links lia hover. We'll give it a background here. Instead of background color, we're going to have a background. Is going to be 4338C9, which will be slightly darker than our background. As you can see here, we already have a cool background here, or cool hover effect. And then we are going to add a border radius here, border radius of 10 pixels. Then just below this here, we're going to have nav links. We are basically going to be targeting the I tag or our logos or icons. So we give it a small margin right of 10 pixels so it can look way better. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add an active style, so we can have the main section of the dashboard active. So here we're going to give it a background. We'll basically just copy this background here and paste it here, so we can have this as active. The next thing we're going to add here is we're going to style the content. We'll give it a transition margin left of 0.3 seconds easing out. This is going to give us a cool transition effect when we're going to be opening and closing the sidebar. And now this is where the real thing happens. We are just going to add a style here, which is going to help keep our content always to the right of the screen, which is going to be margin left 250 pixels. We see that the content always stays to the right of the screen here. So if you have any other content that you want to add in your dashboard, you just come to the content here and add it, and you'll always be in the right of the screen. So now the next thing we're going to add here is we're going to give it a padding of 20 pixels. So it should not be too close to the sidebar. So we give padding 20 pixels. And then the next thing we're going to target here is the close button. So let's have close button here. We're going to give it a cursor of pointer, and then we give it a border of known, and then we give it a background. Let's give it a background instead of known. And then we give it a color of white, and then we give it a font size of 36 pixels to make it a little bit bigger, and then we give it a padding of 5 pixels vertically, so basically 5 pixels and 10 pixels. Then let's also go ahead and do the same thing to our open button here. So we'll have the open button here, and the next thing we're going to target here is we are going to target purely our open button. So instead of having an open button here, instead, let's remove this here and let's have a separate style for open button. So here we're going to have open button. Here we're going to have cursor pointer. We'll give it a position of relative, and then we give it a top of 250 pixels or 520 pixels because we want it to be like in the center of the screen, like right here. And then here we're going to give it a background color of white, and here we're going to give it a color of black. The color is already black, so this is just going to be a little bit redundant. Here we're going to give it a border radius of 100%, and then here we're going to give it a transition. We'll give it a transition of basically say background color 0.3 seconds ease, and then we're going to rotate it. We'll rotate it 270 degrees. And then there is a small issue here because it doesn't have to be as long as this. So let's take a look at what we have here. Okay, so in order to have this as a round circle instead of as a very ugly looking stuff as we have here, we need to change the positioning from relative to absolute. And then we're going to remove the rotation here. We'll leave the rotation as it is. Then after this, we're going to add in a padding of 0 vertically and then take 10 pixels horizontally. Or we can go ahead and instead add a padding here of 5 pixels so we can have a cool round circle right here. The next thing we're going to do here is that we're going to add a little animation because like this, it will be difficult for the user to know that this is an actual button. So we'll have a small animation that is going to be like a pulsating animation to show the user that this is an important button they need to click on. So here we're going to have 0%, and then here we're going to have transform. Here we're going to have scale 1, and then here we're going to add a box shadow. We're going to give it a box shadow of 000, then RGBA that we're going to give it an opacity of 0.5. Then at the 70% mark, we're going to still give it a transform. So we're going to have transform scale 1.001. We want it to be very minimal. Then here we're going to give it a box shadow of 10 pixels, 10 pixels, and 10 pixels again. Now we're going to give RGBA. And finally, at the 100% mark, we want to give it a transform of scale of 1. We're going to give it a box shadow here of 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, then RGBA, and everything goes back to 0. Then inside our open button here, we're going to come and we're going to give it an animation. We'll basically say here, we'll say pulse. And then for the duration, we're going to have 1.5 seconds. And then we want it to pulse like 3 times. So let me go ahead and wipe this thing off. So here, we're going to have a small animation here, which is going to be a very good indicator to show that this is a button to click. Then next, we're going to add a hover. So we're going to have here hover, which is basically going to be the same as our background. So once we come and hover here, it gets the same as our background here. And then finally, we're going to add a media query. So once we minimize the page, we want the sidebar to basically be minimized too. So here we're going to have 768 pixels. And then here, we're going to target the sidebar. And then here we're going to say transform, translate X, or we'll say translate negative 100%. And then here we're going to target the content. We'll target the content here and give it a margin left of 0. So now in order to make this responsive and this response to our click, we have to modify the JavaScript. So we have our CSS, so we have already built our CSS and everything looks good, but now everything has to be responsive. The web page basically has to be dynamic. So let's go to our JavaScript. So the first thing we're going to target here is that we are going to target the close button. So we'll say document.getElementById. We'll have here close button. And then we're going to add an event listener. So we say add event listener, click. And then let's put here, we are going to basically be listening to the click event. So inside this function now, we're going to have document.getElementById. And then here we're going to say sidebar. And then here we're going to have here dot sidebar. And then here we're going to have here dot style. We set it to style.transform equals to translate. We're going to have style.transform equals to translate 100%. So here we're going to say translate 100%, or rather negative 100%. We can close the function here. And we're also going to close the bracket here so we can avoid any errors. Then the next thing we're going to do is let's click on Alt Z. So Alt plus Z to put everything inside our viewport so we don't need to be moving horizontally throughout the screen. So the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to add another document.getElementById. So we'll say getElementById here. We're going to target the content. And then here we're going to say style.marginLeft equals 0. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to say document.getElementById. We'll basically be targeting the open button. So here is going to be open button. And then here we're going to target the display. We'll say style.display equals to block. Then we're going to still target another event listener or add another event listener. We're going to have document.getElementById. And then we will target the open button, because remember initially we targeted the close button. We target the open button here, and then we're going to add an event listener. We'll add a click function here, or a click event, and then add our function. And then inside this function now, what we're going to do is we're going to copy all what we have here and just reverse everything. So here is going to be translate 0. Here the margin left instead of 0 is going to be 250 pixels. And then here display is going to be none. So if we come to our code, or if we come to our file and test everything, we see that here we are having this right here. So this is not desirable. Normally when we click on the close button like this, so this is not desirable. Normally when we click on the open button, this is supposed to disappear. This is only supposed to show when the nav bar is closed, and then the main content is supposed to go to the left when this is closed. So let's go ahead and see what's the problem with our code, and it's probably in our CSS. So initially the open button here is supposed to have a display of none. So we're going to say open button here is supposed to be display none. So that once we click on this, so let's refresh the page. We see that we have a problem here. So once we close it right here, the welcome to your dashboard does move to the left, and we don't have the icon here. So the error we are having is because we have getElementById here, whereas when we go to the index.html, we don't have an ID. So we want to instead target the query selector or the class. So we are going to use the query selector here, and then we're going to use here the query selector again. So another small error we did is that when we use the query selector, we have to add a dot right here, and we add a dot right here. So if we close it now, we see that it actually appears, and this button appears here. So we can now have our responsive sidebar. So we see that it's actually very responsive and very smooth. And if you're trying to create a dashboard, you can actually use this to create your dashboard. Like after the user logs into your platform, you can take the user to this dashboard right here. And obviously you can do the same thing if you're working with React.js or with Vue.js or any other JavaScript library or framework. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And if you want to see me making any other tutorials like this, let me know in the comment section, and see you in the next one.